Are you still undecided about your vote on November 3rd? There's more than just the presidential race on the ballot. We'll talk with local experts and officials to examine the key issues and races in Southwest Florida. Next on Election 2020, The Vote.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us for The Vote. I'm Mark Bickel with the News Press and the Naples Daily News.
And I'm Julie Glenn with WGCU. Tonight is the latest in our monthly collaborative series on how coronavirus has hit Southwest Florida's economy, schools, healthcare industry, and most importantly, the area's people.
Tonight, we're looking at how it can impact the upcoming presidential election, from absentee balloting to swaying voters' preferences at the polls.
So many people have already sent in absentee ballots that the leaders of the statewide Florida Supervisors of Elections held a news conference on Monday to let people know that results may not come in as quickly as usual this election because they say it takes election officials longer to verify and count absentee ballots than votes cast by electronic voting machines.
So if you're among those who plan to avoid the polls on Election Day but want to have your voice heard, you have a couple of options. You can go in person for early voting starting on October 19th. Early voting polling locations and their hours of operation are listed on your county's Supervisor of Elections website. Or you can check out a cool interactive map at wgcunews.org.
You can also still request an absentee ballot to mail in or to drop off. These can be requested from your county Supervisor of Elections by fax, email, or in person. Vote by mail ballot requests must be received by 5 p.m. on the Saturday 10 days prior to the election. That will be next Saturday, October 24th. Once you've filled out your ballot, it must be postmarked on or before Election Day, November 3rd. You can either mail it via the U.S. Postal Service or drop it off yourself at an authorized secure drop box located at each early voting location. But you can't drop it off at your polling location the day of the election. You can surrender your mail-in ballot if you want and vote in person that day, though.
So we talked with the Supervisors of Elections in Lee and Collier counties about a lot of these procedures. And we'll hear that interview in just a second. But first, there are 6 constitutional amendment proposals on the ballot this year. We'll be showing brief explanatory videos of all 6 throughout the show tonight. The videos are produced by the USA Today Network Florida team. Here is Amendment 1.
There are 6 potential changes to the Florida Constitution coming before voters in November. Amendment 1, Citizen Requirement for Voting Initiative. Amendment 1 would basically make a slight but nuanced tweak to Section 2, Article 6 of the state's governing document. The state constitution currently states, quote, "Every citizen of the United States who is at least 18 years of age and who is a permanent resident of the state, if registered as provided by law, shall be an elector of the county where registered." Amendment 1 would change the word every to only a, so if passed, the amended state constitution would read, only a citizen of the United States. A supermajority vote of 60% is required for Amendment 1 to pass. Proponents of the amendment say that the use of the word every is inclusive and tells us who can vote, but is not specific as to who can't. The change would have no legal impact to voting in Florida, as only citizens can legally vote here now.
Every time there is a vote, be it a primary, a midterm election, or a presidential election, the collective eye of scrutiny turns to the ballot booth, the process of polling, voting, and counting votes. But this year's presidential election is very different. In just days, we'll be voting in a pandemic under a smoke cloud of doubt about the possibility of a legitimate election, that smoke cloud being fanned from the highest office in the land. Ultimately, it is the local supervisors of elections who work to ensure the security of the vote and the safety of the voters. I'm joined now by the Supervisors of Elections in Lee and Collier counties, Jennifer Edwards and Tommy Doyle, respectively. Thank you both so much for taking time to talk with us during what I imagine is a very busy time.
Our pleasure.
My
Yes.
first question is for both of you. Are you going to be voting in person or absentee? Jennifer?
I'm going to be voting absentee. I do that every election because I want to feel and see what our voters are receiving in the mail. But then, of course, I visit all of our early voting locations.
Yeah, I bet you're kind of a little busy on the actual election day, too. Tommy, are you absentee as well?
Yes, I'll vote absentee, but I probably will, because I come to the office every day, I'll probably carry my ballot and hand it into the vote by mail department just because I'm coming here every day anyway.
Yeah, you might as well. It's pretty convenient. So for people voting in person, what's going to be different at their polling places? Is there going to be social distancing, COVID setups, different kinds of dividers? Jennifer?
Yes, of course. We are doing everything we can for the safety of our voters and our election workers. And what that means is, again, we'll be doing the plexiglass sneeze shields at the different stations. We will have the sanitizer and the wipes and wiping pins and screens and buttons and machines, and doing everything we can to protect our voters and our election workers.
And Tommy, same thing in Lee County, I would imagine?
Oh yeah, we've spent a lot of money making sure our poll workers are safe and keeping our voters safe also. All early voting sites have got the sneeze guards. We have hand sanitizer, wiping down the voting booths. You know, I tell people, if you're going to vote in person, please bring patience, because we're cleaning after every voter walks through. So yeah, we're going to keep everybody safe.
And I'd like to add too, because Tommy is so correct, that bring your patience, because we're going to be cleaning, but we're also going to have a long ballot. So those two things mean there may be some lines. So be patient with us. We're working real hard to make it a very positive experience.
So decisions on levels of wiping things down, hand sanitizers, has that been a county by county thing, or was that dictated statewide in any way? Or is this individual?
County by county. We follow CDC. There have been recommendations out there for election workers and administrators to use. So that's what we've done.
I was just going to agree with Jennifer that, you know, it's mostly the guidelines that we receive through the CDC and other supervisor of elections, giving their ideas to us, and we've spread it around and taken their ideas and added to our ideas and made things really safe.
Do you actually anticipate a whole lot of people showing up at the polls? I mean, how has your absentee ballot requesting been? Tommy, I'll start with you.
Well, the requests are been really well. I think in the primary election, we've seen a record number of people drop off their ballots at early voting and other drop-off sites. I think that number is going to increase, and I think you'll have a lot of people showing up at the polls. And we're expecting a turnout of the high 80s. So, you know, we have 470,000 voters. So that's going to be a lot of people voting. Even we got 215,000 requests in. So, you know, I know at least that 80% of that's going to come back to us, and we're still got a lot of people to vote early and on election day.
So absentee ballots that go out, you tend to expect 80% of them to come back in Lee County?
Yes.
Is that kind of the same in Collier County, Jennifer?
Historically, we've had about 60% return.
Oh, really?
And what that means is many people will wait and say, I really want to vote in person. You know, that we have a population that wants to go to the polls. So we've encouraged our voters to request a mail ballot as a safety net in case something happens and they can't get to the polls. But many will actually go in person to early vote or vote on election day, because that's what they want to do, and they've always done that. And they can take that ballot with them and surrender it and vote a regular ballot at the polling location. So when we say 60%, that doesn't mean people haven't voted. That may mean that they did vote in person.
So if you ask for an absentee ballot, you can take that with you to the polls, say, hey, I requested this, but I decided instead I'm just going to walk on in. That's
Yes.
okay? Do you have to have that absentee ballot when you present yourself?
No, if you leave it at home and you haven't voted it and mailed it to us, as long as we haven't received that mail ballot, you can go to the polls, early voting or election day, and vote in person.
There's been some concern with people about mailing in their ballot. I'm sure you've heard about it. People worried about the Postal Service not getting it there in time, signatures not matching up correctly, and their vote not being counted. In Lee County, Tommy Doyle, what kind of things can people do to make sure that their vote does arrive and is counted?
we'll make sure that, what we call, I stole this from another supervisor, it's R&R, request early and return early. So we get that ballot in time, so it is counted, so it doesn't come in late. Far as the media hype with the post office, I think you need to disregard some of that talk and feel confident that our post office is going to act appropriately, because we stay in close contact with our distribution center, our local center right down the street from us, to make sure these ballots get to us in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm. But Jennifer, tell me a little bit about the drop box locations and early voting. Those are not necessarily synonymous, I don't think, are they?
A little bit. We have 9 early voting locations. We'll begin October 19th for 13 days. And there's a drop box at every one of those early voting locations beginning on October 19th. But here at the office, we have a 24/7 drop box that's secured right outdoors, right next to the entrance to our main building. And we have already received ballots. I had a couple of calls on Saturday saying, "Hey, I've already voted my ballot. I want to drop it off. Where do I take it?" And so we have ballots. We had ballots dropped off over the weekend here. We're also doing something that we haven't done before, and that is at 4 of our early voting locations, we're going to have curbside drop off. What that means is we'll have staff under a tent that will accept the voter's ballot from their car and drop it in the box right there, so the voter can see that it's been dropped into a drop box. But we're doing that at 4 locations, and that information can be found on our website at colliervotes.com.
And I know that we have put together an interactive map here at WGCU that covers all 7 counties in Southwest Florida, with where drop boxes are located in each of the counties that this signal reaches. So that's available too at WGCU.org. So we put that together, compiling all the information that is all already readily available on all of the Supervisor of Elections websites. So people have up until 10 days before Election Day to request their ballot. How is it possible to get those things turned around and get them back?
Well, we encourage the voters to vote them and get them back to us as soon as possible, of course. But we just work hard. We've got great staff, and we have hired additional staff to work in temporary role to help us process all this. Managing vote by mail is like a production line, and we have our procedures in place and our security in place, and we just constantly work at that. And we prepare the ballots for tabulating, and then we hand them off to our IT staff who does the actual tabulation. And they work as many hours as they need to get it done.
So you're able to start counting as things come in. Do you expect to have all of the absentee ballots counted by Election Day?
Is that for me?
I'll ask you, Tommy.
We'll probably have 98% counted, because we'll have other things coming in, like after 7 p.m. Because we'll have ballots come in before 7, and we have branch offices that are drop-offs until 7. They'll have to get to us, so we'll have a little bit to process on election night, but 99% of it will be already reported on our website. First, early voting, all the vote by mail that we have, and then Election Day, and then the rest of the vote by mail will be reported a little later.
Tommy Doyle in Lee County and Jennifer Edwards in Collier County, I want to thank you both for taking the time to talk with me when you are clearly quite busy. So best wishes in the coming weeks, and we'll be hearing from you soon.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
While presidential elections tend to energize voters to the tune of 60% voter turnout versus 40% in midterms, the race for the highest seat in the land isn't the only thing on the ballot. In Florida, we have amendments to consider. Here are 2 more of the 6 on November 3rd, explained in videos by the USA Today Network, Florida.
Amendment 2, $15 minimum wage initiative. Amendment 2 would incrementally increase the minimum wage of Florida workers from $8.56 per hour to $15 per hour by 2026. If passed, Florida workers would see minimum wage increase to $10 an hour on September 30th, 2021, and increase $1 a year thereafter, with standard cost of living increases resuming in 2027. A supermajority vote of 60% is required for Amendment 2 to pass. Proponents like Orlando Attorney John Morgan say Florida must pass an amendment ensuring a living wage that will provide workers with the means to pay for basic needs for themselves and their families without government assistance. Opponents like the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association say a minimum wage at $15 per hour will have disastrous effects on the state's tourism industry and will cause employers to find ways to cut staffing, reduce hours for remaining staff, and find ways to automate work. They also remind voters of the trickle-down impact, as business owners would be forced to pass along the cost to consumers. Amendment 3, Top 2 Open Primaries for State Offices Initiative. Have you ever been annoyed that you can't participate in Florida's primary elections because you are non-party affiliated? Amendment 3 could change that. Amendment 3 would change Florida's closed primary elections for state elected officials to a top 2 open primary system. Those officials include state legislators, governor, lieutenant governor, and elected cabinet officials like the Attorney General. Florida primaries are currently closed, making only voters with party declarations eligible to vote for the candidate who will represent their party in the general election. The top 2 open primary system would list all qualified candidates running for the office on the primary ballot and allow all registered Florida voters to choose. The top 2 candidates, regardless of party affiliation, would move to the general election ballot. Also, if there are only 2 qualified candidates in the primary election, the primary would be canceled and both candidates would be moved to the general election. A supermajority vote of 60% is required for Amendment 3 to pass. Proponents like All Voters Vote say Florida's primaries exclude the majority of voters from being able to make their voices heard. Amendment 3, in their view, would make politicians accountable to all voters, not just the ones in their party. Opponents, which include Florida's Republican and Democratic parties, say the ballot language is misleading and confusing. Amendment 3, in their view, limits voters' options and could potentially shut out a single party in the general election.
Another big item on the ballot is the U.S. House seat held by Republican Francis Rooney. That is Florida's Congressional District 19, which covers a large coastal portion of Lee and Collier counties. A proponent of term limits, Rooney chose not to run for re-election after 2 terms. That left a vacuum that almost a dozen Republican candidates and a handful of Democrats sought to fill. The primaries saw Byron Donalds nominated on the GOP side and Cindy Banyai getting the nod from Democrats. Earlier this month, WGCU and the News Press Naples Daily News hosted a candidate debate live in the studio, and one topic that rose to the surface was the environment. Let's have a look at some highlights from that debate and then a roundtable discussion with local reporters who've been covering these issues.
As you both know, Congressman Francis Rooney has been a very strong advocate for the environment and, more significantly, battling climate change while serving in the House. Many in Southwest Florida would like to see his legacy live on through the work of his replacement. So can you please outline the steps Southwest Florida should be taking to ensure resiliency in the face of climate change, i.e., how should we be preparing for strengthening storms, rising sea levels, and what should the federal government's role be in this?
So yes, it's true that Representative Rooney was somebody who had broke ranks essentially to recognize the importance of climate change and the human component of it. I will tell you right now, and I'll let him speak on this, my opponent has denied the human factor in climate change, which is demonstrable according to evidence and thousands of scientists around the world. Florida is going to be the most highly affected state in the entire country when it comes to climate change. We need action. We need coordinated action from the local level to the state to the federal to the international level to begin the climate mitigation around reducing the carbon footprint of countries as well as the other greenhouse gases, shifting to renewable technologies, and working on those climate mitigation strategies on the local level. We're going to need funding from the federal government to be able to do that, and we're also going to need initiatives such as the Florida Green New Deal to help our economy as well as localities, as well as the Green New Deal across the United States to make sure that we're investing in the technologies for the future.
First of all, let me just say the science on man-made climate change or man-made global warming or man-made global cooling, whatever we choose to call it, is not settled. What we do know is that seas are rising. Sea level rise is real. It is impacting parts of Florida and frankly, parts of the world, without question. Is there something that we should be doing with a coordinated federal response on sea level rise? Perhaps. But here's what we're already doing in the United States. Here in our country, we've already limited more CO2 emission than in any other country in the world that is our size. The Chinese are not doing it. India is not doing it. We have already been leading that fight and doing that here at home. We have actually been making sure that we do the things to protect our waters and to protect our environment here at home. And we're going to continue to do those things. But signing on to radical policies like the Green New Deal, all it will cause is for electricity prices to rise and the poorest among us will suffer. That is not the type of strategy that we need going forward, not just with energy policy, but environmental policy.
It was certainly a lively exchange. Anyone interested in seeing more from our debate between Florida Congressional District 19 candidates, Democrat Cindy Banyai and Republican Byron Donald, can watch the entire virtual event through WGCU Public Media's Facebook page. Joining me now for a closer look at this congressional race and other political contests of local interest here in Southwest Florida is a roundtable of news press reporters, including Lee County Government reporter Bill Smith. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
We're also speaking with News Press senior writer and storyteller Amy Bennett-Williams. Welcome, Amy.
Hi.
We're also speaking with News Press city reporter Melissa Montoya. Thanks for taking the time, Melissa.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I wanted to stay on the Congressional District 19 race here to get started. So, Amy, I know you've been watching this race closely. To begin with, was it a bit of an upset that Byron Donald or Cindy Banyai even turned out to be the winners of their respective primaries back in August?
Actually, they were both considered underdogs. Byron Donald's campaign was much less well-funded than Casey Asgar's and Dr. Fig. An analysis that we did after the fact showed that they outspent him by about a third. So he spent a third less per vote as what they did, and still he carried the race. Although it was pretty close, but it was not so close to require a recount. And the same thing is true with Cindy Banyai too. She was considered an underdog. There was a better known candidate, David Holden, and yet she prevailed as well.
Is there much in the way of consubstantiation agreement between Donald's and Banyai's platforms? For example, we heard them talking about water quality and environmental conservation, and that really seems to have become much less of a partisan issue, at least for voters here in Southwest Florida.
They will both, they sound like each other when they each say water is a nonpartisan issue, that it's a quality of life issue and it doesn't have anything to do with party. However, the mechanisms that they each use to assure clean water do differ along party lines, but they both agree that that's a top priority for this region.
All right, and one of the areas where perhaps they appear furthest apart would be when it comes to education, and particularly education funding.
Yes, Cindy Banyai is an advocate for strengthening the public education system, and Byron Donalds has been a strong proponent of charter schools, and his wife founded a charter school management company, and he believes that parents should be able to choose to which school their children go, whereas Cindy is more classically liberal and believes in strengthening public education.
All right. And the Lee County Supervisor of Elections Office tallies more than 208,000 registered Republicans and more than 131,000 registered Democrats. In Collier County, you see similar margins where there's just simply more registered Republicans than Democrats. Do you think at the end of the day, that means regardless of policy, this race is likely going to go to Donald's?
That's certainly what I heard from people wise in the ways of such things. FGCU political science professor Peter Bergerson has told me several times that essentially it's a fait accompli. And Donald's, because this is essentially a one-party region, because he has the Republican, because he won the Republican primary, that he will most likely carry the election. Of course, anything could happen, and there could be something shocking or some kind of an upset. We don't rule that out completely, but I think the people who pay attention to such things believe that the seat already belongs to Mr. Donalds.
All right. Melissa Montoya, let's bring you into the conversation with a look at the city of Fort Myers mayoral race. Current city council member Kevin Anderson and Lee County NAACP chapter secretary Jacqueline McMiller emerged as winners of the August primary. Now, this is technically a nonpartisan race, but does it feel that way? I mean, after all, McMiller has been getting support from the Democratic Party.
It certainly feels that way. I've noticed it this time around with, covering the elections, the ward elections and the mayoral election. It's a lot more partisan than it has been in seasons past.
All right. And can you maybe run us through some of the basics about these two candidates in regards to their platform?
Kevin Anderson sat on city council for 2 years now, and he's a former law enforcement officer. So, I know that's been a big part of the conversation this time around with Black Lives Matters. And I think, there are some things that he likes to hold police accountable. That's what he says all of the time. Because if you hold them accountable, they're going to do their job better. So, but, I think Jacqueline McMiller, when she approaches law enforcement, she, the way she says it is that, she was a court reporter and she's been an investigator with DCF, that she kind of sees another side of the criminal justice. And I think that's why she's kind of targeting, the Fort Myers Police Department a bit more than Kevin Anderson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Does the race seem to you in a way to almost be mirroring kind of the cultural conversation we see happening nationally in regards to law enforcement and this progressive push to, as they call it, defund the police? What they really mean is just putting money into more social service programs to prevent police needs and I guess prevent police from having to respond to all the things they currently do. It just seems interesting that that national conversation is happening, and here we have this race where that seems to be the primary issue.
It certainly feels like that's what's happening, and McMiller, she is, I don't believe she's for defunding the police, but she does want more oversight. I know that she wants to make the Citizens Review Board stronger so that, they actually have a say into what happens to some of the police officers that get in trouble. But it certainly feels that way. We've had a conversation this year about the Robert E. Lee statue in downtown, which is no longer there. And, that's stemming from all of the protests that we've seen here, like in the rest of the country.
All right. And Bill Smith, I want to turn to you now and talk about some of these Lee County Commission races on the ballot. First off, we've got Sanibel Mayor Kevin Ruane, who decidedly won the August primary. He now faces a write-in candidate, Kelly Hotchkiss, who doesn't seem to have any campaign presence whatsoever that I can find. And this isn't the only local race where something like that is occurring. What's going on here, Bill?
That is basically just an attempt to make sure that only Republicans could vote in the Republican primary back in August. Under state law, if the only choice that you have is in a primary election, regardless of your registration, you can vote in that primary. Because there was a write-in candidate declared for that position, as well as for some others, including a commissioner elections, supervisor of elections. Because there was no other choice, there was another choice when the write-in candidate emerged. And that meant that the primary was closed to anybody who was not a registered Republican. This is something that we saw a few years ago when Larry Kiker found himself in a race against a candidate, Dick Anderson, who came within a very close margin of defeating Kiker. And what happened there was a doctor from Lehigh who registered to be a candidate. And because he was going to be a write-in candidate who would be available to be voted for in the final election in November, that meant that the primary was closed. So that is why I believe that you have all of the write-in candidates. Many of them are from nowhere near Lee County who have made themselves candidates. That was to make sure that only Republicans could vote in the Republican primary. The question there is raised whether or not it's good politics because it means a party primary is for only the people who are members of that party, or whether or not it's just a way to try and deprive people of their right to vote. I'll leave it to anybody who's observing to decide which of those they believe. So those primary races that were ruled to be only open to Republicans are simply because of those write-in candidates that you're talking about.
Well, thank you so much. We've been speaking with News Press reporters Amy Bennett-Williams, Melissa Montoya, and Bill Smith. Thank you all so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Florida will likely see visits from both Trump and Biden in the next few weeks, including a visit from Trump to Fort Myers tomorrow afternoon. Meanwhile, activist groups on both sides of the polarized political spectrum are putting all their energy into a final push to get people to the polls. This past weekend, Call Your Freedom and Call Your Now kicked off their Get Out the Vote caravan at Mi Mercado Foods in Naples Manor. 2 more events are planned for the next 2 Saturdays. One will be in Golden Gate and the next will return to Naples Manor on the 24th. These are nonpartisan events where partisan materials are discouraged, and candidates are welcome to attend but are asked not to campaign. That may be a tough ask.
Well, early voting is yet to begin. Mail-in ballots have been streaming into all of Florida's 67 counties, Julie. So far, just over 2 million ballots have been cast by mail, and we still have 19 days left until in-person election day. 3.6 million more ballots have been requested but have yet to be returned. In the last presidential election, 2.7 million ballots were cast by mail in total. Counting of mailed-in ballots can legally begin at 7 a.m. 22 days before the election. So in some counties, Julie, votes are already being counted.
Well, let's take a look at a breakdown of party of ballots returned so far. 623,000 were returned from registered Republicans, and 1,043,000 have been returned so far by registered Democrats. A little more than 400,000 have come in from people declaring no party affiliation.
How about a history lesson?
A little bit trivia.
When colonists came from England to this new country, they brought an electoral process called first past the post voting. Say that 5 times fast.
First past the post voting.
What does a horse racing term have to do with multi-party political elections? This video produced by USA Today breaks it down for you.
The United States is unique in conducting most of its congressional positions using what's called first past the post voting. Think of it as a simple horse race. The first horse to cross the finish line wins. First past the post, or FPPP, is also known as single-member plurality voting. The theory is simple. Whichever candidate has the most votes after ballots are counted wins the seat. Let's say John is running for office and he gets 36% of the vote. Jane is also running and gets 33%, while Donna gets 31%. Even though the majority of voters, 64%, did not vote for John, he still wins because he's the single candidate with the highest number of votes. In most states, congressional elections are decided by first past the post voting. The presidential election is not. It's decided by the Electoral College, which makes it a hybrid of first past the post and a majority system of voting. First past the post was inherited from the Brits back when America was a colony. Supporters say it's easy for voters to understand, easy to count ballots, and cheap to administer. But critics say voters choose the candidate they dislike the least. Candidates get elected with a small amount of support, and one party tends to win the majority of seats. Maine uses a different system to decide its congressional elections: ranked choice voting. Voters rank the candidates in order of choice. For a Senate race, for example, it won't make a difference because there's only one winner. But for a city council or state legislature, it more accurately reflects voters' choices. In addition to Maine, Utah and Virginia are phasing in ranked choice voting. While America's first past the post system is a holdover from the Brits, parts of the UK have moved on to a different system, including Scotland, Wales, and Ireland.
Being an important holder of 29 electoral college votes means all demographic voting blocks are being courted by both parties. The youth vote, which is traditionally lean, especially in Florida, saw a spike of activism in the year following the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting in 2018. According to Tufts University, the number of young people who turned out for the midterm election in 2018 broke records. WGCU's Michelle Alvarez reports the energy is still there, but what's motivating young voters has changed.
The March for Our Lives and post-Marjory Stoneman Douglas gun control issue is credited for boosting young voter turnout in the midterm elections. But in this presidential election, the issues have shifted, but the passion is the same.
And it hurts to see people like that, to see people like you who are so beautiful get screwed over by so many people when you don't deserve
Lauren
it.
Shanley is an FGCU communication major, and she's talking at a peaceful protest in honor of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. For her, this will not be her first time voting, but it is important for a number of reasons.
I think that inequality needs to change, and I definitely think that our current president gives a platform to those people who are prejudiced towards those who have a different skin color or a different ethnicity, basically those who aren't white. So I also think that climate change is a big issue, and I know that our current president does not believe in climate change, so that's something that needs to be worked on.
Shanley says, ironically, being on lockdown because of a pandemic has given her time to fully research all the issues she'll find on her ballot.
I registered the second that I could, and because of COVID, I finally, for the first time, registered for, mail-in voting. And I think that everything being virtual, it has its cons and it has its pros. And I think that it kind of helped me with this election because I was able to figure out more about what I wanted, about learning how to do certain things.
Tori Puglisi is also an FGCU communication major, and this is her first time voting. She's excited, but adds,
I'm also aware this is a very important election, especially the build up to it.
Through the chaotic build up to this election, Puglisi says one-on-one conversations with other young voters seems to be the best way to boost turnout.
I think it's very important for young people to vote because we have such a powerful voice, and if we all unite together to make ourselves heard, then we can make a very big impact. I'll be voting in person.
According to a Harvard youth poll, 62% of young voters definitely plan to vote this year. That same poll back in 2008 reported that 63% of young voters planned to turn out. That was the year the youth vote was credited with earning Barack Obama the win. Michelle Alvarez, WGCU News.
It's great to see young voters want to have their voices heard this year. Two more significant voting blocks, which make up much of Florida's population, senior voters and Latinos, are also being relentlessly wooed by candidates. We'll talk about that with political science scholars in just a bit, but first, here are explanatory videos by the USA Today Network Florida team of the last 3 of the 6 amendments Florida voters are being asked to decide this year.
Amendment 4. Require constitutional amendments to be approved twice initiative. Currently, if voters approve an amendment in one general election, the change goes into effect. However, the passage of Amendment 4 would require constitutional amendments to be approved by voters at 2 successive general elections for actual passage. A supermajority vote of 60% is required for Amendment 4 to pass, and if it does pass, future amendments would require a supermajority vote of 60% each time the amendment is on the ballot. Proponents like Keep Our Constitution Clean Incorporated say Amendment 4 will help cut down on the number of seemingly frivolous changes to the state's governing document. In an interview with WFSU, attorney Jason Zimmerman states the U.S. Constitution, which was established in the 1700s, has only been amended 27 times, whereas the Florida Constitution has been amended 140 times since the 1960s. Opponents say Amendment 4 would make changes to the Constitution more difficult and expensive. It would also cause delays in truly necessary changes. Amendment 5. Extend Save Our Homes Portability Period Amendment. Moving to a new primary residence, this proposed change would give you more time to transfer your Save Our Home benefits to your new abode. Currently, the state constitution gives a person 2 years to transfer the Save Our Home benefits, which range from $25,000 to $50,000 in homestead exemptions, over to their new homestead. Amendment 5 would extend that period by a year to 3 years. Amendment 6, Homestead Property Tax Discount for Spouse of Deceased Veterans Amendment. When a veteran dies, their homestead discount dies with them. Amendment 6 would change that. If passed, Amendment 6 would transfer a deceased veteran's homestead property tax discounts to their surviving spouse. The discount would remain in effect until the spouse remarries, dies, or sells or disposes of the property.
Throughout this program, we've been showing short videos which explain the 6 constitutional amendments on the ballot this November. Now we're going to add some context to a couple of them and talk with 2 political scientists about some significant voting blocks, Dr. Sandra Pavelka and Dr. Peter Bergerson. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Dr. Pavelka, I want to start with you. Why amendments to the Constitution? I mean, it's a pretty serious document to amend, and we seem to be amending it every couple of years. Why are these not legislated by Florida state lawmakers?
Well, obviously, there are a good number of laws that go through the legislature, but there are those that may be special interests or groups who want to see their proposition or amendment in the Constitution specifically. Now, to me, and what I also convey to my students, is that the Constitution is a very sacred document. It includes guiding principles for for citizens, for government, and really only in certain cases should you amend it. However, that's not the case in Florida. We have various amendments that have been approved. Now, obviously, there can be glitches in that. There may need clarification. For example, the amendment that passed a few years ago with regard to the restoration of felons' rights, that ended up in the court. So it's not as easy to change and to clarify constitutional amendments as it is, for example, a law. So that is, something that to me personally and professionally is, challenging. And the other thing that I would say is that constitutional amendments, you have to read them very carefully because one word certainly can put you off a little bit. So,
one of them that I really kind of didn't understand was the one about citizenship, the one saying you have to be a citizen in order to be able to vote. But I thought that was the law anyway.
It is the law. You must be a U.S. citizen in order to vote in this country. Now that amendment is looking to be a little more specific, an exclusionary, I should say, in that it's trying to exclude non-citizens, which they're excluded already. However, there are a number of municipalities and counties who have included some measures in their laws, their policies for cities and counties to allow non-citizens to vote for specific measures. And so this amendment would exclude that, and it would be in the Constitution, so it would be very clear that that non-citizens could vote in any case, that it is clearly only U.S. citizens who could vote.
And Dr. Bergerson, I would like to change now and shift to Amendment 3, which would open up primaries for the state's top offices where a registered voter can vote in any party's primary. As it is, only Republicans can vote for who the Republican Party's nominee is, for example, for governor. Why the move to change that?
Well, thank you, Julie. The change has come about primarily because of the significant rise in nonpartisan registration or no party affiliation. Approximately a third of registered voters are Democrat, approximately a third are Republican, and a third are nonpartisan. And when you have a closed primary like Florida has, and many other states for that matter, in the primary election, you can only vote for the party in which you have pre-registered for. Well, that leaves out roughly a third of the voting population. And subsequently, at least the proponents of it argue that you should have what has been referred to as a quote unquote jungle primary, in which all candidates, particularly for statewide office, governor, lieutenant governor, and the elected cabinet officials, they would all, and as that matter, state senators and state representatives, all candidates, regardless of party affiliation, would be on one ballot in the primary election. And the top two vote getters then, they would face each other in the November election. So if this amendment goes into effect, first of all, they would need at least 60% of the voters to approve the amendment, as any amendment in Florida. If that is approved, then what will in essence happen is that you'll have one ballot in the primary, and the top two vote getters would face each other, and then the winner would obviously take office.
So, Dr. Bergerson, I'm going to stay with you for a second here. There are always attempts to predict how certain voting blocks are going to vote. The youth vote, older Americans, Black voters, and a group Florida is particularly heavy on, the Latino vote. They make up 14% of Florida's eligible voters, according to the Pew Hispanic Center's data analysis. But this group that represents a number of cultures from many different countries, and they really just can't be generalized as leaning in one political direction in unison. Dr. Bergerson, what do you see as far as, is there any unity in the Hispanic vote?
Well, thanks for the question. That's an excellent one with the election coming up 30-some days away. It's very difficult to consider the Hispanic vote as, in essence, a unified bloc vote. 60% of the Hispanic vote is in 3 counties, Miami-Dade, Broward County, and then in Orange County in the Orlando area. The Hispanic vote in Miami and Dade tends to be overwhelmingly Republican, and the Hispanic vote in Orange County tends to be predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly Democratic. And then you go to Broward County in the Fort Lauderdale area, 11% of the population in Broward County, it comes from Central and South American background. And again, the Hispanic vote there tends to be heavily in the Democratic column.
It's really an interesting analysis. When you look at the numbers, they kind of, I don't want to say cancel each other out when you have Cuban, Puerto Rican, one going right, one going left, and just how they kind of, as far as numbers stack up, they're about equal as far as number of registered voters in each of those blocks.
I think you're absolutely correct. And I think one of the reasons is that, at least in Miami-Dade, they have the interest in going back perhaps to Cuba, or the remembrance of a Cuban lifestyle, particularly the older Cuban Americans in the Miami area. And they also tend to have a conservative background. Puerto Ricans and Central and South Americans, they're much more diverse and different in their voting habits.
Mm-hmm. There's one other interesting voting block that I want to get to. My last question to Dr. Pavelka. Recently, a Wall Street Journal reporter talked with older Republican voters in the Fort Myers area and found that there are many who voted for Trump a first time, and they don't plan to do so a second time. So could this election prove to be the first time that older voters are not predictable?
Absolutely. The senior vote, the older population, first off, they show up, they vote. And what we've seen in Lee County is that in 2016, Lee County's numbers went to Trump by 20% in terms of the senior population. Now, since then, 4 years later, the senior population has declined to some extent. But again, they will show up to vote. There's a flux in terms of their support for Trump and Biden. Although there are staunch supporters, there are those who are concerned about their Social Security, about Medicare, about health care, et cetera. And so this is going to be, I believe, an interesting election with regard to the senior vote because we're really not sure where it's going to end up.
I want to thank you both for talking to me about these subjects tonight, Dr. Pavelka and Dr. Bergerson. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Pavelka. Always good to work with you.
And it's interesting they're talking about the senior vote, which, according to reporting in the news press, is part of the reason for President Trump coming to Fort Myers and then going to Ocala tomorrow, because of the concentration of senior voters in both locations.
Yeah, it seems like the strategy is changing every day, and especially at this time of the election, they're looking at the numbers and deciding which way to go and who to talk to, and clearly this is a hot spot.
I think we're getting into the 11th hour.
Absolutely.
Speaking of hours, let's take a look at some deadlines and some dates of note that we want to remind you of. If you don't want to vote in person on Election Day, you can always go for early voting, which starts on October 19th. Excuse me. Got something in my throat.
You okay? Yeah, like Julie said, early voting begins on October 19th. Early voting polling locations and hours of operation are listed on your county's Supervisor of Elections website. You okay?
I got fly in my throat. Vote by mail ballot requests. You don't want to hear this voice. Go ahead.
Okay, vote by mail ballot requests must be received by 5 p.m. Saturday, October 24th. Vote by mail ballots can be requested from your Supervisor of Elections office by fax, email, or in person. Ballots must be postmarked on or before Election Day, November 3rd.
And as both Supervisors of Elections indicated, and I got my voice back, take your patience when you go to the polls, because they will be sanitizing in between each voter. They'll be wiping things down, sanitizing pens. Plan to wear a mask because they are going to be observing CDC guidelines.
And I think people are used to it by now. You know,
At
having
this point,
gone through this for 7 months, hopefully it's not like a big deal like it was back in March.
Yeah. So we want to thank all of you for watching The Vote here on WGCU. Now get out there and have your voice heard, unlike mine 30 seconds ago, and vote. If you missed part of the program and want to revisit, you can find it on any of our Facebook pages, WGCU Public Media, News Press, and Naples Daily News. I'm Julie Glenn.
And I'm Mark Bickel. Good night.